but we can certainly set up things in parallel or certain checks and balances and help empower people and get them information that at least they can try to push back against it and not just have to blindly accept it.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds. I am Stephanie Weidel. Do you want the inside scoop from those who have seen totalitarian policies trickling out of our government? Do you want to hear from more whistleblowers? If you like what you see, please consider donating towards the podcast. Visit our social media pages from which you can share our full episodes and clips. Also, visit our website where you can learn more about Feds for Freedom at fedsforfreedom.org.
Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Mike Donio is a scientist with 20 years of experience in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry. Due to his deeply held religious beliefs, he was let go from his most recent role for not complying with the COVID-19 vaccine policy. He has founded Science Defined, a newsletter and developing program that breaks down science for the average person, that then emboldens the person to then ask informed questions about science. Welcome, Mike. Thanks so much for talking with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. It's really great to be here with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Mike, for the sake of our discussion, you seem like a very accomplished scientist. Would you explain your credentials?
Sure, I'm happy to. I have 20 plus odd years as a research scientist. So I was in the lab doing research, mostly in industry, pharmaceutical and biotech industry. I have the kind of unique benefit of having had a lot of kind of a diverse amount of experience. I've worked in a number of different scientific disciplines. Most recently, I was a senior scientist at a clinical stage biotech company developing anti-cancer antibodies. But I've worked in a number of other different areas as well in industry. I have a degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology, so it's my bachelor's degree, and a graduate degree in biotechnology, and
from Johns Hopkins.
Johns Hopkins, yes, that's true.
Well, okay. So leading up to 2020, was there any cause you had to question the intentions of the scientific community?
Well, I've always been the kind of scientist that asks questions, that doesn't just accept things at face value. And I had seen things throughout my career that didn't add up to me. You know, I went in, I think like a lot of scientists do, quite naive, optimistic that we can help to do something that can, you know, benefit people, yada, yada, yada. And once you get into the system and the industry and everything, you kind of start to see that this behemoth that is the pharmaceutical industry and biotech industry it doesn't quite work the way that you think, or most people probably think. I mean, they come off as being very patient focused and all this stuff, but it's really all about profits. And so that plays out a lot, both in the lab and in the boardroom, so to speak. And yeah, I mean, I certainly saw throughout my career, my fair share of things that made me start to question whether, people were really concerned about scientific integrity and doing really good, proper science, or whether it was just about, getting more funding, or, just trying to make things look like, we had a good drug that was, marketable or whatever. I mean, so yeah, I mean, I definitely had my fair share of questions. And
obviously it bothered you not to have the patient as the focus, but did it bother other people? I mean, if a majority of the scientists and doctors in our country are not focused on the patients and helping them get better and live healthy lives, what does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say, I don't want to come off sounding like that all scientists could care less about patients or anything like that. But it's just that I think the primary focus is for a lot of scientists is trying to do things to enhance their own career, their own kind of profile, because they're focused on, climbing the career ladder and, you know, uh, making themselves look good. And then, of course, the companies themselves, I mean, it's all about serving the investors, especially in biotech. I mean, where a lot of these companies, especially the startup companies, you're highly dependent on private investors. Some people say, well, are they all in on it? Are they all trying to be, again, like, is it just nobody cares about the patients or anything? I mean, I wouldn't say that that's true either, because there were definitely a number of people that I worked with that had, people that had cancer in their families or their own personal experiences that were definitely, would have loved to have brought a good treatment forward. It's just, I think the majority are clouded by a lot of other ambitions, and so it kind of gets in the way of really being able to focus on the patients. And the thing is, when you look at a lot of these companies' websites, like they have a lot of messaging, like the patients, putting the patient first and stuff like that. And that's just, there's a different, you would see a much different view if you were in the lab, in the boardroom, et cetera.
Boy, this whole, the way that you talk about it, the whole thing is very, we are very familiar with that. And people are pursuing ambition. Isn't this the age-old issue, putting ambition above truth? Anyway, but were you aware of scientific fraud in your 20 years of experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the way that I can answer that is to say yes. I would, from my perspective, I would certainly say that I am aware. I was aware. I'm still aware of scientific fraud that occurred. Unfortunately, I can't really discuss it because I'm currently in a. So this occurred in my last. Well, there could have been other stuff too, but there's clear things that I can think of from my last place of employment, and I'm currently, I have an active lawsuit going against them pertaining to my termination. So trying not
and this was before
to do anything
COVID.
to compromise that if I can help it. But as much as I'd love to air all this stuff, but
and this was before COVID.
Some of it's before COVID. So, kind of throughout my time.
So how did your employer respond to COVID?
I think they pretty much, from my perspective, kind of fell in line with the rest of industry. There were a number of kind of policies that came out. We kind of shut down for a brief period of time, but because we're a lab and an active, company involved in clinical trials and everything, that couldn't stay for that long. So, we kind of had like a hybrid approach where people, kind of had staggered times where they came in. And then eventually we worked our way back up to more or less kind of going in most of the time or full time, because just based on need. But then there were things like, where you had to wear masks and stuff like that, other precautions that were put in place. And so they had different policies that they put in place. And there was nothing specific for the vaccine until right around when what is it called? The Pfizer one, Comirnaty, was kind of approved, although, obviously there's questions about that. But so like right around that time, then, like I guess everybody was kind of mandating it. So then they kind of adjusted the policy to account for that. But there were lots of different things that they were trying to do to, I guess, mitigate risk and that sort of thing. And I mean, but we kind of just, we had to come in and work, and so we just kind of went along as business as usual for the most part. I mean, with exception to some things like masks and whatever. But
well, what is a typical scientific response to an infectious disease?
You would think that, again, like talking about scientists asking questions and not just you wouldn't want to just accept something at face value without confirming, that what you're being told is true. And I think, a lot of scientists will, if somebody tells them something, generally speaking, they'll go and do a literature search or something and say, can I find some evidence of this? But with this, it was kind of remarkable because most of my colleagues, it seemed like, and people in the industry just accepted what was being told to them and kind of just went along with it. And it was really peculiar because I was like, how can you not at least do a little bit of due diligence on this and look into it? And it's not that there was, I mean, again, we had a pretty small group on the research team, and there were one or two of my colleagues that we kind of talked about stuff with respect to what was going on, but by and large, everybody just kind of, went along with what was coming out from the governments and from the company and stuff. And it was just surprising to me that more people didn't take a harder look at, what we were being told and say, is there really evidence to back this up? I mean, it was just kind of staggering. But I mean, I think, maybe people were just caught by surprise. But as scientists, we should be the ones that should be armed with the understanding to be able to go and do the research and ask those kinds of questions and not just blindly accept it. I mean, I get it if the public is kind of being stoked by fear and they don't understand, some of the stuff that they're being told, which is unfortunate, and I'm hoping to help with that. But but scientists really should have been more on top of that and not just accepting the science, so to speak.
Accepting the science. So how did you respond at that same time?
I mean, I was looking into, what was the test that they were using? What was, throughout the whole thing, kind of like asking questions and saying, well, how do they know that, that this virus is the cause of this disease that's coming out? What are they using to test for it? And of course, when I saw that it was a PCR test, I remember, I think I told my wife, I was like, this isn't going to end well. And then, I was like, I really hope that this is just a short-term solution and they come, but nope.
And what did you know about PCR testing? And we're going to be discussing current PCR testing soon, but what did you know about PCR testing that would make you say that?
I have a lot of experience in my career using PCR, developing PCR assays and tests myself and using them. So I'm familiar with how they work, how they're developed, how, the potential pitfalls. And it's not really something that can be used to diagnose a disease like that in the way that they were using it.
All right. So how did you respond when you were given were you made to test?
No, well, not at all up until, so, I mean, that was one of the kind of things that was part of the vaccine mandate part that kind of came later. But I mean, by that point, when I declined to take the vaccine, I wasn't allowed to go back into the office, to the lab. So that never became an issue with testing. But yeah, they never required us before that to test or anything. Although people were, I mean, but I didn't, and I wasn't trying to like force my opinions on anybody. I would just chat with people as people were coming, and most people, you know, were just kind of going along with it, like I said. But a couple people, you know, we were like, you know, kind of shaking our heads at it. But and I would talk to people at, you know, my wife or friends of ours and stuff like that, and kind of explain to them what I felt was going on. And but I mean, I kind of just thought, if I'm seeing questions with this, then I'm going to make decisions for myself and my family. But I mean, you know, a lot of people just kind of got caught up in it all. And
what was your reasoning? How did your faith impact your decision to refuse the shot?
the thing with that was, so I basically kind of looked at it from two different ways. One was absolutely my faith, but another, you know, was the fact that as a scientist, I took the time to research the companies that were developing it, the technology itself, etc. And when I realized what it was, that was a huge signal to me that, you know, this was not something I should probably do. And then, but my faith, my Christian faith, really kind of sealed the deal that I would say that gave me the strength to be able to make the decision in many ways, because I had faith that this was what I was being called to do, pushed to do, and that it was, whatever happened, it was going to be okay. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why, like I said, I submitted a religious exemption and it was declined. And then.
So have you been out of a job since your refusal to take the shot? Was that 2 years ago now?
It's, 22, yeah, it's coming up on 3, 24. Yeah, coming up on 3 years. Wow.
No, where did the time go? It's like we've been stuck in this same like year.
It's like Groundhog Day thing, you know, that movie.
So have you been out of a job since then?
Yeah, I guess pretty much. I mean, it's just, initially I thought about going back, I kind of wanted to test the waters and just see how far reaching the effects of my declining this were going to be. You know, it's kind of like, I wonder if I would be able to get back into a job at industry, or if this was going to be something that was going to be a significant barrier or not. And so I kind of stuck my feelers out and reached out to people, you know, colleagues that I had known and worked, you know, in the industry and stuff for years, and then applied to jobs and connected with recruiters. People that I had worked with for years were like, I can't help you. I don't agree with your decision. I was shocked, but, you know, maybe not too surprising. These people were very much, you know, part of the scientific, you know, establishment and stuff. And so they were not going to question what they consider to be.
No, wait a minute. We cannot say they're part of the scientific realm or scientific community and then say they're not going to question.
Right.
It's like they don't fit. So we can say they're part of the pharmaceutical pseudoscience and they don't question. That's a little bit more right. It's just, I just laugh. Anyway, go ahead.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You reached out to them.
And so then with the recruiters, they kind of said the same thing. Like I would explain, they would say, "Oh, you know, your credentials are awesome. I can get you, you know, a whole bunch of jobs. I got all these jobs open. I can get, you know." And then I would say, and then they would say, "Well, why are you looking for a job?" Or, you know, why are you out of work, whatever. And then I would tell them, and they would say, "Oh, well, I remember this one guy was like, I don't get it. You're a scientist. You should know better. Why didn't you take it?" And I was like, because I did know better, because I'm a scientist and I actually researched it. That's why. And he was kind of like, okay.
Because I am a scientist.
Right. All right. Well, in that case. So that kind of
Okay.
like shut the door. I was like, okay, well, this might not be too easy to get back into this, especially at that point. You know, this was the end of 2021. Things were still very much in a state of craziness with all the restrictions and working through the weeds of the vaccine mandates and stuff. So that, you know, it was like there was no way if every company was requiring them. And they were trying to say that it wasn't a condition of employment and things like that. You know, they were trying to skirt it. Oh, it's just we're mitigating risk, but it was absolutely a condition of employment.
Okay, before we get further into your story and Scientists for Health Freedom, I wanted to talk about the scientific method. What is the scientific method? Well, my children have learned a song. Can I sing it for you? So the scientific method is question, research, hypothesis, experiment, analysis, conclusion. My 4-year-old is learning that this year. My 9-year-old can, rattle it off. So would you clearly and concisely explain how the scientific method should work and how it was seemingly abandoned by the scientific community in the past couple years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I mean, this is obviously a big question because if we're talking about integrity in science, I mean, there should be a formal process that we should be following for all kind of scientific inquiry. And it's not to say that there's necessarily one rigid process that like a one size fits all, because there's different within different scientific disciplines and things, there's different ways in which things work, but just sort of kind of roughly overall, there's like a general process for scientific inquiry. You have to start from somewhere where you've gained some kind of information that enables you to formulate a hypothesis. This is the word hypothesis basically is the derivation of that word. It basically means like foundation. So it literally is the foundation of the scientific method. It's the foundation of an experiment, because all hypotheses should be testable by an experiment. So the hypothesis is where it's a lot of people will say that it's kind of an educated guess. You're kind of stating what you think might happen, and in a way that you can test it. And so that's like the very foundation of everything that's going to come after it, because you're going to design your experiment explicitly to test that hypothesis. And then when you go, after you analyze the data and you're evaluating your results, you're going to go back and test that hypothesis and say, did I validate it or not? And so from there, like I said, you're going to design an experiment to test the hypothesis, or maybe experiments, and then analyze the data from that and try to, you'll have objective results, findings from that data. This is what happened. This is what we found. And then you'll draw subjective conclusions, interpretations of that data. And then you'll try to fit that to your hypothesis and say, do we feel like we've validated it or not? Well, a lot of scientists nowadays, kind of, even if they go through roughly a process that, approximates that, they don't, they'll just kind of do it and be like, okay, we're done. We got the answer we wanted. But science is an iterative process. We used to joke way back, like putting the re in research. It should require a lot of repetition to get it right. You're most of the time, you're not going to get it right the first time. I mean, from all of my experience in the lab, the majority of the time when you do experiments, even the best designed experiments, you wind up with more questions than answers at the end. You're going back, you're revising things, you're going back to the drawing board, revising your hypothesis or whatever, or your experimental conditions, and then you're trying again and you're seeing, I mean, the scientific process is long and arduous, and like anybody that says you're just going to do one experiment and get a result that's good and you're done is, doesn't understand it. But the problem is now we have this system that's so fed by money and profit, that, and many times you'll have an investor or something, that someone that's, someone in senior leadership or an investor that's asking for a particular piece of data because they want to make some claim about, the drug that's being developed. And so you'll design an experiment explicitly to try to get a, specific result or find something, and that's the type of work that you're doing in the lab, but that's not according to, a formal process of scientific inquiry like this. So, you should be going through this process where you're hypothesizing something, designing experiments to answer that, and again, it's repetitive, in order to, and maybe you never get to a point where you say, okay, this is valid or not, but there has to be some kind of rough process to scientific inquiry.
So how did you attempt to reason and use your explanation, but attempt to reason with your superiors and your coworkers? And what was their response?
With respect to like the whole thing, or with the vaccine?
The shot mandate, the use of PCR testing, which you knew was not right to diagnose a disease.
I didn't really get a chance to really talk, push back with respect to the shot. I mean, and I can't really get into like the nitty gritty of what went down with respect to the process that unfolded leading up to my termination. But I think with a lot of people, you submitted a religious exemption and then they kind of, asked you some questions and stuff and then made a decision. And that I feel like was kind of one of the problems with the process, was we didn't have really a process or opportunity to actually push back in a formal manner to say, hey, do you think that this makes sense? Does this add up? Is this safe? Is this da da da? It was just kind of like, okay, here's the policy, comply or not.
And that was probably the whole point, to shut you down instead of making themselves think about what they were doing. So going forward, how do you speak with people about what you observed, with the whole thought of the scientific method and how, we're supposed to approach things like this?
Yeah, I mean, I try to explain to people the way that things are supposed to work, ideally, with any kind of scientific inquiry with respect to the clinical trials, which obviously were problematic, and how quickly everything was accelerated way faster than what would normally be the case, and steps being skipped and all this stuff. And that, it's not abnormal to ask questions for anybody. And especially if you see inconsistencies in the process or things that are being skipped or whatever, that's stuff that should be red flags that we should be inquiring about and digging into.
Do you think that there was so much separation from reality, or is so much separation from reality and even public opinion right now, which shouldn't be a factor, but anyway, a separation from reality, that now lockdowns, PCR testing, and even a shots over a virus might be attempted again?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at the first time as potentially a test to see if the people would accept it, well, by and large, I mean, yeah, there were, and like, there probably are a growing amount of people that have kind of seen through it, or at least questioning it to some degree, but clearly the majority bought it hook, line, and sinker, and I don't see any reason why they wouldn't try it again.
What do you make of the WHO's declared emergency on monkeypox?
I mean, I don't really although maybe I should, but I don't really pay a great deal of attention to, the stuff that they're saying, because I don't, it's beyond just like, you know, health, right? I mean, it's like propaganda, or, or they're trying to like stir up stuff. I mean, we're in the midst of an insane time here in the US with this presidential election and everything. And it's like, of course they're going to like throw out, try to scare people with a new pandemic. And I mean,
yeah. Well, what's interesting is that they are starting to push PCR testing. Like that word has been said in regards to monkeypox.
I think any new, whether it's monkeypox or mpox, as they're calling it, or bird flu, or anything else that could possibly come out. Every now and then you'll hear some sort of new virus. There was like this one that popped out called like the Nipah virus or Nipah virus or something a couple months ago, or and like any of these things that I think that pop out, like the standard operating protocol going forward now is going to be PCR testing, and you're going to have development of some sort of mRNA or genomic based vaccine technology.
But aren't they shooting themselves in the foot to keep pushing all of these new viruses and PCR testing, lockdowns, blah, 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 blah? People become immune to that whole line of thinking, and they're not going to, they're going to eventually say, I'm sorry, this is ridiculous. We've never had this in the history of humans. No, we're not. Aren't they shooting themselves in the foot?
You would think so, but I hate to say it, but I think a lot of people would probably go along with it again. And it's not to say that, I want to be clear, I don't think that the majority of people that went along with it necessarily went along with it because they were terrified that something was going to happen, like of the virus or whatever, that they were going to, because I think it became pretty clear that by and large, the risk to the majority of the population was not very considerable. I think people were more afraid of the ramifications of not going along with the stuff. Like I remember my kids were doing different sports and things, and all of the kids' activity, they were making everybody mask and all this stuff. And, I remember talking to some of the dads and some of the stuff and saying, well, this is, we agreed that it was ridiculous, but they would not, like, they were like, if we don't keep the masks on, the kids aren't going to be allowed to play, and like it was like this stigma, like everybody's so comfortable in their lifestyles and everything. There was a greater fear of not being accepted, of the ramifications of all this stuff, than of the actual, pandemic. But that's the whole thing with social engineering and all that. Like, and I think that's the bigger thing. Once that's instilled in the population, that's hard to overcome. When it's beyond just, I don't think, again, it's going to necessarily be that people are going to be necessarily afraid of mpox or anything else that comes out. I think they're gonna not want to go against the narrative. They're not going to be that one person in their group that, oh, so and so didn't follow. What are you? You're one of those crazy, whatever. Like, people don't want to be that guy. They don't want to, rock the boat and lose their cushy life. And I think, it's unfortunate.
Well,
I hate to say it, but
yeah. Well, that is one mission of Feds for Freedom and the Feds, is to give examples of people who stood up, to then embolden the general public to take a stand when something smells really wrong. So, all right, you started Scientists for Health Freedom. What was your goal, and what has become of it right now?
Yeah, so when I lost my job, one of the first things I thought of was, gee, there's got to be some, I mean, even though I knew that, like, there were probably a lot of scientists, my colleagues and stuff, that didn't decline, that didn't lose their job. I knew that I was hearing about people in other companies and stuff that were having the same thing happen to them. So, like, there's got to be other scientists that are being affected by this, that maybe, maybe there's like some sort of community or something where people are gathering and talking about it and speak, and having some kind of a forum to share what they're going through, what everything. And I couldn't find anything. So I was like, all right, well, I'll just create something, and maybe, and if I can have a place where scientists can get together and feel like they can talk about what's going on and actually ask questions, and really even more, and give them a platform to speak out, because we really need more scientists that are willing to stick their necks out and speak out and stuff like that. And so that was kind of the hope. I didn't see anything really that was out there that kind of was doing that. So I was like, well, I'll just create something. And I mean, it gained a little bit of traction for a little bit. And I mean, I just haven't had a lot of time to put into it. But what I kept finding out was just how much the threat of and risk of of retaliation is. I mean, obviously I saw it. Like you're just, there's not a lot of scientists that are still within the system, and even scientists that were pushed out that were still thinking about, like, I'm going to get back into this. They just, it was just too much for them to speak out about it because of the threat of, they knew that they would lose their job. They wouldn't be allowed back in the industry. They'd be blacklisted. I mean, I'm sure I am now. And it's just, most people are not willing to cross that bridge. And so it kind of just became a little bit of, I mean, I'd still love to encourage people. And I talk about it when people are gracious enough to ask about it, like you are, because I think it's important to help bring these things to light of what's going on in scientific research and in the industry. We need people that are willing to speak about it. I think there's probably a lot of people that have seen things, that have things to say, and maybe they don't think that what they've seen or what they have to say is important because they don't feel like they've been privy to like some huge thing. But I think anybody that's worked in there's probably has something that they could contribute to the discussion. And I wish more people would speak up, and and that's what it was really all about. But I mean, I've just kind of had to shift my focus on other things to attempt to find a new path towards generating some income and stuff like that. But I mean, I still think it's a worthwhile venture.
Mm-hmm. You've started the, is it a Substack, Science Defined? It's a newsletter. But then you also have the blog, Still in the Storm. Did I get it right? And so you have these two. Would you talk a little bit about Science Defined?
Yeah. So Science Defined is, so I started it when I launched it. I put out a newsletter, but my vision is to make it more than just a newsletter. So essentially, it's an educational platform that will help people to navigate, to distill, to understand like the complex terminology that's used by doctors and scientists in the medical industry, to really break it down so people can understand complex studies and apply them to their own situation, so that people can have the confidence to find resources and information that they can lean on to make those decisions for themselves, for their families. I mean, nobody knows what's in your best interest in your situation like you do. And so I think it's so important that people get this information and make the most informed decisions possible. I think, people like the Faucis of the world wanted everybody to just depend on them, but they don't know you. How can they, and maybe they're recommending in their minds what they think is the best thing. But again, it's a blanket generalization that we as a populace should I don't know. We should not just accept these things. We should say, okay, we know what's going on in our house, and take that as, okay, this is one possible option, and I'm going to go and look into this stuff and decide what is the best fit for myself or my family. And so that's what Science Defined is all about. It's making science accessible and hopefully easier, because I know it can be overwhelming and intimidating, and it can take up a lot of time to learn science. People, it can be just easier to phone me up or listen to it, someone else. But I think it's so much more powerful if you can learn it yourself. And, going through COVID and everything, talking to friends and family and people in my community, and just seeing how much information was being flooded at people and the technical nature. And I was able to help break stuff down. But the other thing that bugged me was when people would be told that you're not an expert, you can't ask questions, you don't have a white coat, you don't have, I was like, this is something that's, everybody can learn to understand this stuff. There's no reason why this should be like special information that you can't get to. I mean, granted, it is written to the scientific community, but we can unlock that barrier, and make it accessible. And that's kind of the thing with Science Defined.
How are you making Science Defined different than like a regular science textbook?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because, and I think if anybody has either recently been in a science class, especially, let's say, high school, college, grad school, probably not grade school so much, what you'll notice is that it's by and large just a massive information download. You're just getting thrown an enormous amount of information about, with terminology and concepts and all this stuff. And then you're largely just asked to regurgitate that in some way on tests and things, not to really think about it much or apply it or ask a lot of questions. I mean, and this was my own experience in college and grad school. There was just so much information, because they're trying to cover a massive amount of ground in, a semester, a couple months. And so it's just every lecture, every lesson, it's just, more and more and more and more. And, I thought, well, I could easily teach, and if somebody, and I'm eventually I might do some things about different subjects in science, biology, and things, whatever's in my, I have experience in. I'm not going to venture off into like volcanology or something, but, I feel like it's much more powerful, I think, to teach people how to learn science, to how to think about science, versus just dump a bunch of information on them and probably drown them in that information, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I like how you take simplify science and you give just a definition. It's like every week or something like that, every couple days, and just send out the definition, how it applies to whatever. It's very small chunks, and some of those terms I've never heard of.
Oh, that's good.
So it's been interesting. So before we get to Still in the Storm, I do want to ask, how do you think accountability can be achieved in the scientific community for all of the non-science that is being labeled and marketed as science?
Yeah, that is, and it's going to, I think, probably remain to be a pretty tall order. For the longest time, obviously, when I was still in the system, in industry, and I would have questions and see things that, I didn't agree with, I was the guy that in the meetings that I would push back. I would speak up and, and probably bug the heck out of people, because why are you asking questions about this? Just go along with it, But I was the one that was, oh, well, why is this? Why are we doing this? Why aren't we doing this? But, or, oh, well, I don't know if that doesn't really look like what you're claiming it is, or, stuff like that. Probably cost me opportunities and things. But I first naively thought, well, if we just push back and ask questions, that maybe there's a way to kind of reform things from the inside. But there's just such a strong tide of, of not fixing anything. There's just not enough of an effort. And even when things have been tried, it just hasn't, there's so much against the tide of that and there's not enough encouragement or incentive, I guess would be the thing, to do something about it. And so things just don't change. And I don't know. I mean, on the outside, I think that's where we can try to do things. But I mean, I don't know if you're going to really change significantly what's going on the inside, but we can certainly set up things in parallel or certain checks and balances and help empower people and get them information that at least they can try to push back against it and not just have to blindly accept it.
What does this mean for the scientific realm and community, though? I mean, because people like me, I don't trust the scientists. I don't trust them at all, because what they've told me is wrong. And I've seen it firsthand with my children, saying vaccines are the way. No, they're not the way. And they don't do what they say they are doing. And so what does this mean for science? Because it depends on that there's a standard of truth. And it doesn't seem like there's that.
Well, I think we have to keep holding people accountable and asking questions, even if they tell people that you're not allowed to ask questions. No, you keep going and asking questions and putting information out. And I think the question is, well, one of the questions is, what is the best vehicle or method to really push back and try to hold people accountable, or even go as far as trying to evoke change to actually shift the paradigm? There seem to be kind of at least two schools of thought. One is to try to push things more into the public arena and just say, okay, if we can expose certain things to the public, that at least the public will be informed and they'll be able to push back. But I don't think that's gonna, and that's all well and good. I mean, I'm all for, obviously, for helping the public, inform the public, but if you really are serious about holding them accountable and actually trying to change something, I think we have to make a case, take arguments to the scientific community and push back in an appropriate manner, using the scientific method, using proper scientific inquiry to produce evidence and ask questions and things that would demonstrate that the paradigm, whatever is being claimed by the scientific community is at least questionable, if not, wrong, in error. And I don't know. I mean, that's not an easy task, because the science, they hold all kind of control of all the funding and the resources. It's not easy to do research and stuff like that outside of that.
Yeah, so accountability seems to be in the hands of individual scientists asking questions. Let's talk a little bit about vaccine injury. What have you been observing when it comes to injuries to these shots? And any thoughts on helping?
At least with respect to the COVID ones, I think there's definitely a considerable amount of evidence that there are a lot of issues with them, and they manifest in different ways. But I think we also need to be a little bit careful, because I see people that want to just use that as a catch-all to blame anything and everything on the COVID vaccines. And it's like, but we have a massive epidemic of chronic illness in the United States, of obesity, of metabolic disease, of which maybe vaccines play a role in that. But pharmaceutical, we have massive polypharmacy, where people are on multiple different pharmaceutical drugs, which have multiple different adverse effects and things, and then they're being treated with new drugs to treat the adverse effect. I mean, it's just a massive disaster even before you get to the COVID vaccines. And then we're putting that on top of it. So I think at the very least, we could say that, is it highly likely that what we're observing with the vaccines and the massive increase in issues is them having effects and exacerbating existing conditions and existing comorbidities and problems? Well, yeah, probably. How much of it is directly caused by that versus, increasing or making prior issues worse? That gets harder to untangle.
Yeah, how do you start to distinguish between conditions caused directly by the shot versus conditions caused, well, by factors not related to the shots? Like you said, toxins. That's huge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that it's possible on a huge scale unless people were, and I'm not suggesting people should, but I mean, without knowing people's medical history and the drugs and things that they're on or they have been, like it's hard to know because it's so we're all so diverse.
Hmm.
And then everybody has a different, kind of lifestyle habits and diet and nutrition and whatever kind of ailments they're dealing with and how they're treating it. I mean, there's so many different factors that without understanding all of them, and I mean, it would be a massive task to really try to meaningfully sort that out. So I could see where people, it's just kind of easier, and plus it's I guess if you're going for engagement on social media or something, it's easy just to go, oh, look, what the shots are killing, But I think to be responsible about it and to not gloss over these other glaring issues that are being, I mean, look at, what's going on with the food, everything with the food that we're being given and stuff like that, and the massive issues with all of that. And I mean, we can't, just put everything into the basket of the vaccines and ignore all the other things that are going on that are, hurting us, all the other toxic insults and things that we're being bombarded with.
Yeah, that's so true. So true. You have, our time is running short with you, but you have started the blog, Still in the Storm, where you are taking your faith and drawing a connection to science. Would you talk about that?
Yeah. Thank you. So initially I started the blog just shortly after I was terminated, just kind of as a vehicle to just put thoughts out there and to write, and just as something to kind of do, maybe be a little bit cathartic while I was going through everything. And I kind of wrote on whatever and put up different interviews and things that I was doing. Well, as I've gone through this process and kind of, it's been a big kind of spiritual or rebirth of my faith and getting closer to Christ, and throughout all of this, it kind of started even before COVID when I lost my dad to cancer, and then has gone through COVID, and so more recently I kind of felt like I was called to kind of narrow the focus of the blog, and so I kind of relaunched it, and now it's all about, I've kind of put it as at the intersection of Christianity and science. So starting to rethink, well, number one, to ensure that we are calling out when science oversteps and tries to play God, to try to glorify God through science. So, that it's being put in its proper place. Science has become a religion, a God of its own. And that is not correct. And the thing is, science, I think, can be useful in certain ways. And one of the ways, and if we look at some of the, like, historically early scientists, big names, Isaac Newton, etc., these guys were Christians. They looked at the work they were doing as kind of understanding the creation, and so I see science in many ways as something that can reveal the creator in the creation, as a means of a way that we can glorify God, that we can learn more about who we really are, what he intends for us, by using science. I mean, in looking at the human body, for example, the way in which there's so many different cell types and things that make up our tissues and our organs, but yet they all work together. And if they don't, we know we have problems like cancer and stuff like that. And there's incredible intricacy and differences. It's mind-boggling how they all manage to work together. And that really mimics the body of Christ, how it really is all these people that are coming together and they're unified in this, in Christ, and they work together and they're led by the head. And with the human body, it's the head that really controls, that produces a lot of the hormones and signals and things that balance things out when things are thrown off out of homeostasis and stuff, that pull it back in, that cause things to adjust and compensate and keep us going along day to day, without us even realizing it most of the case. I mean, most things that occur in the body are autonomous, right? You don't have to tell your heart pump or your lungs to breathe, because you'd be dead long ago if you had to do that. So it's just amazing. You know, I really felt like there's a lot that can be said and thought of with respect to science that can help kind of counter how science has been used against us. And even there's even more than that. But I mean, I don't know. And I've been so impressed so far, or like kind of blown away by the response so far. I didn't know how it was going to go. And I just kind of said, you know, this is what I feel called to, and I'm just going to put this out and start writing whatever article, you know, comes to whatever I feel like I'm called to, and just throw it out there. And I think God has clearly blessed it so far. So I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, I think it's really important to the work that you're doing there, because when you look at, okay, so there are lots of toxins. It's in our food, it's in our air. You can be scared about the air that you breathe. You could be scared about the water that you drink. You could be scared about the food that you eat. And yet, are we called to live like that?
Mm-hmm.
No. And so what do we put our hope and trust in? You have drawn the connection to Jesus. He's the head. So I think what you're doing is very, very important, because it gives hope and peace in a very unpeaceful, chaotic time where there are a lot of questions. Mm-hmm. And we question every single thing that we have been taught as for our entire lives.
Yeah.
So so I have one last question. If there is one thing that the average American citizen can do to combat the corruption and to move the needle to what is true, what would it be?
I think for us right now, the biggest thing is, in order to, I mean, I would say, like, don't give up hope, but I think if we're going to be actionable, it's information is power. And that's what is, you know, again, behind my science defined thing. The more information we have, the more we're equipped to ask questions, to push back, to make the most confident, informed decisions we can for ourselves and our family. Then we're at least doing whatever we can within our own control. And then, you know, you can leave the rest up to faith. I mean, of course I do. But whatever people, you know, I'm not pushing my beliefs on other people. And I think as part of that, and this actually is the name of my blog, Still in the Storm. It was out of this idea of finding your stillness, calming down. Here's how we're being thrown all this stuff at us. And I think the goal was to try to get us to, I mean, if you're uninformed and you're using fear and anxiety and stuff to get us to respond out of that quickly and just, okay, sure, I'll do it, you know. So to be more informed and to be making decisions out of a place of calm, stillness. And I love, I forget what psalm it is, but lately I've been really drawn to this where it says, be still and know that I am God. Just finding that stillness. You know, there's also I think it's Mark's gospel where there's this storm raging all around. The disciples are in this boat in the lake, and Jesus says, you know, peace, be still. And he calms the storm. He says, "What? Don't you have any faith?" You know, we just need to, like, there's this is a storm that's raging around us. And I think we need to be calm. We need to find that still and make informed decisions and get as much information as we can, not let other people try to force us into compliance or whatever.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. Yeah. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a very interesting conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. Visit our website where you can sign up for our latest newsletters and become a member of Feds for Freedom at fedsforfreedom.org.